Anger management is not really anger management. Anger management is reactive aggression prevention. That's what we're trying to do.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of 80% Mental. Or I should say welcome back, because we haven't done one of these for several months now because I've been really lazy. I've been doing other stuff. But yeah, welcome back. This is the world's premiere podcast for the psychology behind sport and performance and well-being and health and all of that good stuff. And as usual, I've got Leah Washington with me. Leah, how have you been? I mean, I say how have you been as if I haven't actually spoken to you since, but you know,
Right.
for the audience, how have you been?
It's Tuesday, and I have already referred 3 athletes to counseling, so
Okay.
we're killing it this week.
Yeah, good day. Good job. And we've got an amazing guest with us today. We were hoping to try and record this live in October at the ASP conference in Montreal. And for one reason or another, we never got around to it. But I'm absolutely delighted to have Dr. Mitch Abrams on the podcast with us today. Mitch, how's things?
Crazy. I'm looking outside and there's like 2 feet of snow outside. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like any questions I had about whether or not I was getting enough cardio in, I did like 2.5 hours of shoveling yesterday. So, as they say, man plans and God laughs. So
Yeah.
things overall are very good, but some days are better than others, right?
Good stuff. Well, it felt like the first day of spring here in the UK today. Like the sun was out. I haven't seen the sun for about like 4 months. The sun was out. It was like a little bit warm, like not actually warm, but not freezing cold. So yeah, it was good. It was nice. It was a nice day today. We've got Mitch on because we want to talk about anger, the emotion of anger, and we couldn't think of anybody better to have on the podcast. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Mitch Abrams is a sport, clinical, and forensic psychologist with over 25 years of experience in the field. He is the expert in anger management in sport and has carved a niche as the voice of reason when it comes to normalizing and then using and harnessing anger to achieve performance. So, we're going to dive into anger, the emotion. We're going to kind of pull it apart a little bit, talk about the good stuff and the bad stuff, and kind of see what falls out. So, yeah, really looking forward to the episode, and really glad to have you on, Mitch.
Thank you. We'll talk a little bit about the shame that goes along with anger and how that contributes to people not talking about it. But
Yeah.
I think that as stigma has slowly reduced, and there's still a long way to go, but as stigma is slowly reduced in athlete populations with regards to mental health issues, anger still lags far behind. So I think there's a lot to unpack here.
Absolutely, and we'll kind of get straight into it. And the first thing I want to ask you about, I kind of want to talk about emotions in general, really first. And why is it that we still have such a hard time recognizing emotions, labeling them, and just kind of accepting that they're a normal part of human existence?
Well, I think the first answer is to always blame someone who's not in the room, right?
Okay.
I think that there's two issues that I think stand out, and this is more than just sport. One is the positive psychology movement.
Mm.
When the positive psychology movement first, kind of got its momentum, one of the things that they talked about that was absolutely necessary was this idea that we could view people through a strength-based approach, that everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and if we can help them identify and maximize their strengths, that'll overshadow their weaknesses, and off we go. And I think that a lot of sports psychology, consciously or unconsciously, has taken that as marching orders, if you will. But the other thing that they did was they talked about this idea of positive and negative emotions, and that we should maximize positive emotions and get rid of negative emotions. And frankly, I just think the whole concept of that is bullshit. Well intended, but bullshit. All emotions are good in or bad, whatever way you look at it. The same way as whether or not you consider people good or bad. They're part of the human condition. And
Sure.
so to me, it's not good or bad, but whether or not they're useful and whether or not they're comfortable. And I think people often will say, if it's uncomfortable, it's bad. But especially in the sports world, we're constantly teaching people to become comfortable being uncomfortable. So then why wouldn't we also say, well, then you need to learn to own the fact that you're angry and doing something about it? So I think a lot of it is this negative stigma. You two both could be angry right now, but you don't have any behavioral analog going along with it. So I don't even know that it's there. And so people have just damned it as bad instead of, I think that people also recognize on some level that feels really good when you're angry. Anger is an emotion of power. And it's not until they do stupid shit when they're angry that they start going, whoops. And
Right.
so a lot of my work has to do with getting up to that red line without going over it and leading to behavioral problems. So so I think that that's one of the reasons why the stigma is there. I think the other thing is that and it's not to slander technology, AI, internet, or any of that in general, because I think social media is like a weapon. It can be very dangerous if you don't know how to wield it, but you can learn to master it and do it and use it for good things. One of the places this plays out is with technology is, of course, we don't have to talk about our feelings. We have emojis, right? If I just put a smiley face with a tongue sticking out, which I don't even know what that means, you'll know exactly what I mean by that. And so I think that just as we've decided children don't need to learn math, don't give them an abacus, just give them a phone. I think we've also said, don't worry about teaching kids how to label their emotions. We'll just give them a phone with emojis and they'll get
Mm.
along talking about how they feel fine, even if that's failed miserably.
That's really interesting because I was just about to say, like, from the first thing that you said there, like I was thinking that maybe actually it's not that we don't recognize emotions. It's just that we recognize the kind of ones that we feel are negative or unhelpful, and we kind of like shy away from talking about them because there's that stigma attached. But then you were saying that actually we're not doing that good a job at teaching young people especially, like how to recognize emotions in the first place. Is that
Well,
fair?
well, I think both could be true, right? Both can
Mm,
be true. Yeah, it's complicated because there's evolutionary value to recognize dangerous things. Monkeys apparently are born afraid of snakes, but most animals have to learn that something is dangerous.
mm,
And most people's beliefs are not innate in them. They're taught to them from somewhere else. But once we identify something as dangerous, whether it's accurate or not, then we learn from it. So I can appreciate that there's some evolutionary value in us paying more attention to the negative than the positive. But I think that we owe ourselves more than that. It's not just that it's uncomfortable or even negative. It's we could get some really good shit done if we can own our emotions and harness them. So why are we leaving money on the table? In fact, I'm jumping ahead, we'll come back to this later, but when
mm.
I first got into the field, I was like riding in on a white horse and I just wanted to stop athletes from acting like assholes. And of course, coaches were so receptive to that. And I don't know why it took me so long to realize and really repackage it. I mean, I remember being like 18, 20 years old and getting myself up into a good frothy rage and getting stuff done in the gym that I had never done before. So I knew that anger could be facilitative. But I don't think we pay enough attention to that. And athletes and people, performers in general, who don't learn how to harness their anger are leaving money on the table. It's like a nuclear reactor of renewable energy. We don't need solar panels, just get pissed, right? And you could get things done. And I would even go so far to say, guys, that I don't think there's a single mantra that's got more things done in the history of the world than someone talking smack about you or telling you you're inadequate and your self-talk being, "Oh yeah? Fuck you, watch me." That's anger. And guess what? A lot of people have done amazing things. Driven when other people would just give up, that keeps you going. And so I don't think there's no doubt in my mind that anger can absolutely facilitate performance, but most people don't even know how to label it, let alone modulate it. And that's why we wind up dealing with problems when we have extreme forms of behavioral outbursts, especially in rage states, that everyone goes, look, another angry asshole. Look, if you took Mother Teresa and you put her in a Department of Motor Vehicles, you'd see an angry woman, right? We all get angry. It just manifests itself in different ways, and people have different abilities to tolerate it. And there are also some tasks that are better suited towards anger helping than others. If you're going to try to lift heavy weight, anger will help you. If you try and find motor coordination stuff, higher levels is going to get in the way. So it's not good or bad. It's how much will help us for the task at hand.
It's like you mentioned earlier that like your original thought was like, how can I help athletes not be assholes? Which I think is a very valuable tool because, man.
Where to begin, right? Hold my beer. Sorry, go ahead. Huh?
But, and I think a lot about like, when I talk about things like violence and anger in sport, like, and thinking about like coaches screaming at athletes and like, we don't think twice about it. But if I screamed at one of my students in class, like how they failed an exam and what a fucking loser they are and like, get out of here and don't come back until you're willing to learn or whatever bullshit, like I'd be fired before I got back to my office. Right.
Right.
Like and so it's interesting to think about like this idea originally of like, okay, let's not be assholes. But like, how did you sort of like lean into that idea and like decide that you wanted to become like that? Anger was like the niche thing that you sort of like latched onto and sort of like developed into this like expert on anger.
I think a lot of it was growing up a very poor kid in a very poor neighborhood. I was basically a Jewish kid amongst primarily black and brown people. Um, we were all dealing with all kinds of hardships, and it sucked. And not surprisingly, sports were a joining place. I mean, I'm not so naive as to act as if sports somehow has some special dispensation and racism doesn't exist. But sports leveled the playing field for a lot of us in a lot of ways. And so, um, and there was plenty of violence among us. In fact, athlete or not athlete, a lot of people that I grew up with are either dead or in jail now because they did not um, find better ways to do things. But even the most talented folks, I was always curious why there were some really, really talented athletes and never got where they could have gone. I mean, I played ball with a couple of players that were pro quality athletes, and they were labeled as uncoachable. Meanwhile, they were like the most well-mannered guys in the neighborhood. So I think it started on some very primitive level for me, recognizing that this was a fork in the road for a lot of people. Um, and then I also was aware that there were times that I was playing that I was deliberately aggressive. Um, I would deliberately take a penalty early in the game just to make sure that wide receiver coming over the middle was worried about me. And it wasn't, and I wasn't like, I hope that the person's in pain. It was instrumental aggression. When we talk about different types of aggression, I had a very clear goal. I wanted to get in this guy's head, and I wanted him to worry about me. And it worked. And so when something works, it reinforces you, right? Okay, so fast forward, I'm in Brooklyn College. I'm working in Bally's Health and Fitness. So I'm going to college, pre-med at the time. I wound up majoring in psychology, but I'm working in a health and fitness club at the pre-steroid era, and everybody's super macho and who could lift more. And of course, my anger helped me because it certainly was doing better than I could have. But I was also bouncing in clubs Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. And now you start to see very primitive alcohol-infused violence all over the place. And I realized very quickly that anger interfered with that. And so now this idea, people think anger equals violence. And I was in situations that my ability to not get angry was what helped me. So this all kind of primed the pump. I had no idea what this would do for a career point of view. But I go to Long Island University and I'm getting mentored by Eva Feindler, who was one of the top child and adolescent anger management people. And I said, I want to take your program and apply it to athletes. And she said, okay, sounds interesting. You're going to have to find a sports psychologist. I said, the fuck is that? I mean, this was 1994. I never heard of any of this. She tells me, go to this conference. It was a local conference on Long Island, and find Shane Murphy. I say, all right, who's he? He goes, well, he's the first full-time sports psychologist for the United States Olympic Committee. I said, how am I going to find this guy? I'm just like, I'm a first-year graduate student. There's going to be hundreds of people there. Shane winds up sitting right next to me, right? I mean, this
No
is
way.
right. And even though Shane's an Aussie, he went to Rutgers for graduate school, and he's a
Right.
huge Mets fan, and I'm a Mets fan. So it's
Perfect.
like, not only couldn't I find him, he sits right next to me. We start talking shop. I tell him what I'm interested in, and in typical Shane Murphy, he said, "Great, mate, let's do it." Right? It was immediately thumbs up. No one's done it. If you're going off the tracks, I'll help you. And mentorship went a long way. And what wound up happening was that almost um, immediately he was writing the sports psych handbook at the time, and I was working on my dissertation or finishing my dissertation. And he said, "Listen, I need someone to write the chapter on anger." He goes, "Actually, there aren't any chapters on anger." And I said, "All right, great." He goes, "No, no, no, not so quick. Nobody knows who you are." So he paired me up with Bruce Hale, who had been in the field for a while, and he helped craft the chapter. And before I knew it, I was writing a manuscript for human kinetics. And so I think a lot of what happened for me was I kind of fell into it because no one else was. And so I'm almost the expert by default. And I figured a lot of this out because I also work in prison, right? I'm the chief psychologist inside New Jersey state prison system. And so people will often go, I don't get it. You work with athletes and inmates. What do they possibly have in common? And of course, they're expecting me to start talking about athletes that break the law and all the rest of that stuff. And I say, well, I know this is going to shock you because it's a very deep concept, but they're both human. And both of them find very often, if they don't have the ability to manage their emotions, especially anger, it's going to complicate their lives. And then people kind of go, oh, that was kind of anticlimactic because the answer is right in front of you. I can't tell you how many times I've done presentations and people aren't sure if they're like in awe or so disappointed. I guess they have their jaw dropped in both directions, right? Because when I talk about this stuff, it's almost never that people go, holy shit, I've never thought of this. It's so intuitive. People go, thank God someone said it out loud. So I guess I kind of found this path primarily by being Don Quixote, screaming at the windmills. Not a lot of people talking about it. And so one of the good things about human kinetics giving me the opportunity to write my book was that, as you know, once you write a book, you're an authority. So I changed the definitions to what made sense. And it led to a white paper or a position paper in ASP, and off we go. And I've been writing and presenting on this stuff since.
And of course, your book, wonderfully titled "I'm Not Fucking Angry," is just out, and we'll talk a little bit about that after we take a short break.
Sure.
So this is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Mitch Abrams and Dr. Leah Washington, and we're unpacking the emotion of anger. And we're going to dive into Mitch's book, which is wonderfully titled "I'm Not Fucking Angry." The anger of the title just kind of shines through. But I kind of want to break it down a little bit. And it's interesting that earlier you were talking about your experiences as like an athlete and as a bouncer and how that sort of had an impact on the field of study that you chose. And I guess like what, you talked about being angry and lifting, but being aggressive on the sports field. And I'm really curious to sort of break that down a little bit. Like what is the difference between anger, the emotion, and aggression?
So it's probably the most misunderstood part of the whole equation, right? Most people equate the two. So let's just say for the purposes of simplicity, Anger is an emotion that has a sympathetic nervous system spike associated with it, often in response to a threat, provocation, or wrongdoing. Okay. And physiologically, anger and fear are nearly identical because it's the sympathetic nervous system kicking in, right?
Right.
Where things get a little bit more hairy is aggression. And aggressiveness is really an adverb. It's a description of behavior. So I used to think that there was two. There's three. There's three forms of aggression, but the two that are most important to consider and differentiate are instrumental and reactive. So instrumental aggression is that goal-directed aggression that we want. In fact, when I talk about aggression in general, I believe that aggressiveness by itself refers to the tenacity with which you go after your goal, the passion. Because
Okay.
I have never spoken to anybody who's successful who doesn't immediately start telling me how aggressive they are and how they go about their tasks. And for that matter, I don't know anybody except for, I guess, these trust fund babies, and they wind up sabotaging themselves as well, that has success just dropping in their lap by being passive.
Mm.
So it's intuitive that aggressiveness is required to go get what you want in life. So instrumental aggression is when it's goal directed. It doesn't mean that someone might not get hurt, but the example is like if you're driving the lane playing basketball, the goal is to put the ball in the hoop. If you give someone elbow over their eyebrow while you're driving the lane, your goal was not to do that. It doesn't mean that injuries can't happen in sport, but that's not the goal. The goal in reactive aggression is exactly that. And reactive aggression is related to higher levels of anger. So if we think about it more aptly, anger management is not really anger management. Anger management is reactive aggression prevention. That's what we're trying to do. And the higher the anger the level, the more likely you're going to engage in reactive aggression. So even if we talk about sports success, what we want is we want to increase instrumental aggression. And the reason why you want to decrease reactive aggression is because you get more mental mistakes, penalties, yards lost, etc.
Mm.
And that decreases performance. So and the third version of aggressiveness is hostile aggression, which also has the goal to hurt someone else, but it doesn't have to have anything to do with anger. You know, these are the people that wake up on the wrong side of the bed every day and they're perfectly fine with it. Or people that have grown up in a criminal lifestyle. You know, there's a lot of guys in prison that you just look at them and you go, man, they didn't even have a chance. You know,
Mm.
this was the way things are where they are, and they've embraced it. And so we call that ego-syntonic violence, right? It's perfectly fine for them. And they don't have any moral dilemma about it. Now, in the extreme of these hostile, aggressive people, you might have severe antisociality, even psychopathy. But they're a different game because they don't have to have anything to do with anger. In fact, when you think about the most violent people, psychopaths are almost never in a rage. They're hunting. It's predatory violence. The only time you'll see a psychopath turn into someone with rage is narcissistic injury. So if there's a sex offender who just sees the potential victim as a slab of meat, there's no emotion about it. I'm just taking what I want. That's what I do. But if she makes fun of the size of his penis, then you might see him fragment, rage, and then, you know, hypothetically, some high profile crimes that we've seen over the years, then it becomes what looks like a very psychotic, disorganized crime scene because
Wow.
now they're in a rage. But most often, those folks, they just hunt. They're violent. They take people at their as need gratifiers, and they don't necessarily have a moral code, or a moral
More of a
compass.
means to an end.
Right. And there's, by the way, there's nothing to say that athletes won't live in that realm. I mean,
For
look,
sure.
every group, of course, present company excluded, you get enough sports psychologists in the room, you're going to have some assholes, right? It's just statistical fact. The same way as you're going to get a whole bunch of athletes in the room, you're going to get some people that are antisocial or psychopathic. And we could even talk about why there might be some things in athlete culture that might contribute to that. But it's certainly not the truth for the majority of athletes. But when athletes do transgress that way, I mean, you know, that'll be on SportsCenter before anyone even verifies what's going on. And so that's how I kind of tease it apart. There's also this issue of assertiveness. People were uncomfortable using the word aggressive. So they said, oh, no, no, we don't want instrumental aggression. We want assertiveness. This is just more shame and guilt with people talking about aggressiveness. So we don't like people being aggressive, so we'll say that they're assertive. Assertiveness training was specifically developed for people with low self-esteem to have better communication skills so that you could advocate for your own rights. Sports are about aggressive competitiveness, not assertiveness. And so I think people try to insert assertiveness as a more socially palatable word, but it really misses the mark.
So it's interesting to think about the difference between like you said, anger as an emotion and aggression as like a behavior, right? But when we think some of the more extreme forms of behavior and we start to get into violence, like what's that relationship between anger and violence? Like where do those two things fall for you?
I think it depends. Well, if you say it depends, you're always right, but it only buys you 5 seconds to say what it depends on. I think it depends so long as we're not talking about ice hockey. Hockey's been one of those sports that's always been very difficult because, there's these rules that say fighting and third man in and all the rest of that stuff. But it's certainly a place where violence seems to be okay, at least on a pro level. And
it's also interesting because a lot of it is negotiated and it is actually pretty organized.
You're right on the money, Leah. I think that not enough people realize. Well, nowadays people can't afford the roster spot to waste it with a goon, right?
Right.
So now you have to be an enforcer that also has skills. But in the old days, they had goons, and they were absolutely a fraternity. They would drink together, they would hang out together, and you could even argue that it was instrumental aggression in that, yeah, they might have been trying to enforce or protect a teammate, but they were really trying to change momentum. I'm not a big fan of the term momentum anyway. I think if confidence stays high, then the high achievers will take back momentum as soon as the opportunity is there. But yes, and so sometimes it's almost scripted. These guys knew exactly what they were doing and why they were thrown. They were barely on the fourth line, but you got called out and you had a job to do. So
we have full-on conversations about it, right? They're like, "Hey, man, do you want to fight?" And they're like, "No, but let me get you somebody else," right? Like,
yes,
it's not even.
I love this.
Yeah, I mean,
and I try to explain this to people, and they look at me like I have 4 heads. And I'm like, no, like they fully had a conversation. They talked about it. They planned it before the game. Like,
so it looks to us as if it's very much a reactive thing, but it's absolutely not.
It's not at all.
Right.
I mean, there's certainly and Mitch, you can also talk to this. Like, if you you take a bad hit, like on the top line center, like, and you hurt their special boy, like, all bets are off. You rush the goalie, you crash the net, all bets are off. But like for a lot of it, like that momentum thing, like Mitch was talking about, it's like, that you need to fire up your bench. And so like you find another guy on the ice and you'd be like, hey man,
right,
like, let's go. And they'll say yes or no.
Right. It's like a dating app. I'm not your good partner for you, but I'll find you someone that might be able to take care of your needs. And the sad part about it, and I'll get back to your question. I apologize. We
went on a whole tangent.
No, but sometimes it's good to take the line off the reel because
all I want to say here, Mitch brought up hockey first.
Yes, I did. You're right.
That's a good point, and that's a surprise.
So the shame of it, I think, notwithstanding everything that Leah said, I agree with. I've experienced it. The shame of it is that hockey players seem to think that they need 2 people fighting in order to get their team amped up. It's like there's no other way to say, this is bullshit. We're playing like crap. Let's get our act together. And we have to go beat the crap out of someone else. I mean, the part that no one talks about is when their enforcer gets their ass handed to them. And that just didn't work twice.
So
right? So now the motivation comes from the revenge that we have for our enforcer getting, all right. Anyway. All right. So let's get back to the question again. You were asking about the relationship between anger and violence. And I think, well, first off, there was a definition of sports violence, which I thought was very helpful, which talked about, they didn't use the term reactive aggression, but they were talking about violence that was outside the rules of sport. And that's very important. Like, I remember when I was a puppy in the field, I was talking to Chris Carr. He was at Ohio State at the time. And he said to me, he goes, isn't it crazy that the things that guys do on the 50-yard line, if they did the same exact thing in the parking lot, it would be a felony? And I never thought about it until he said that. I was like, yeah, right? So sports can be confusing because it's a place where anger and aggressiveness is sanctioned in ways that don't exist elsewhere, and you get a much longer rope that nobody even talks about. In fact, all of the research that I've seen, with the exception of some MMA fighters, athletes are not more violent than non-athletes. You take a look at, there's been a lot of studies on NFL players, and you compare them to their age-matched peers, not controlling for money, which is something people should control for, but they're not arrested at a higher rate. So why is that? In fact, especially in football, for offensive and defensive linemen, where their milieu is very much being in that phone book, close quarters, physicality it's amazing that more of them don't have problems with domestic violence, which speaks to the fact that all athletes have anger management skills. The question is whether or not they're as good as they could be, and whether or not they have access to them in the big moment. And that's what I've started to realize, because you don't hear a lot of sports psychologists owning the fact that they really don't know much about anger management, because it's not covered in any sports psych training program. It's not part of ASP's training requirements. And then they certainly don't know what to do with people that are severely violent on the ice or on the field or off. And that's where I've come to appreciate that the next wave will be assessment of criminality, and assessment of the ability to manage your emotions in very high stakes arenas. Like, when I'm interviewing someone who's engaged in criminal acts, I deliberately piss them off. I do whatever I can to provoke them in the interview, because I want to see if they still think. People will ask me, why do you think that you were drawn to this field? Well, I was a pretty angry kid, and my mom told me if I don't get my shit under control, I'm going to ruin my life. But I think that because she told me that early enough, I started paying more attention to it. And what I realized was, everybody has a cliff with individual differences and individual tasks, but we all have that cliff that we fall off of. I can operate at higher levels of anger than most people can, but I still have that cliff, and we all do. And what I try to assess is how I can provoke someone and see if their brain is still working, if their mental skills are still good, even when they're angry. Because everyone says, oh, I play better angry. Oh, yeah? Let's check that one out. And very often you'll have coaches that are, spit flying everywhere, yelling, losing their mind, horrible anger management skills. And then they expect their athletes to be good, right? They sit their ass on the bench for a bad penalty.
I was going to say, we kind of touched upon this last time you were on the podcast. So Mitch has been on the podcast before. So if you want to go and check out the episode we talked about like bad behavior in sport.
Yep.
I think it's in season 2. But we talked about this a little bit last time, and I just want to kind of get back into it, because, you brought up the point there that coaches are often kind of, driving this kind of aggressive behavior. And in sport in particular, like, it's just such an interesting contradiction that you have athletes who you're asking them to just constantly push to the limits, like physically and emotionally, like put everything out there, be passionate about what you're doing. But the second that spills over, like, they are chastised, that, they're horrible people, and that just feels unfair. And I just wonder, like, both of you guys, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's also unfair that they make millions of dollars playing a game. So let's not talk about fairness. Yeah. It's not about fair. But I think the contradiction is a worthy observation. It is unfair. But so what? this is look, there's a very fine line between, and sometimes it's a blurry line. The best performers are the ones that are able to get up here. And I think that the other thing, I don't think we talked about this last time. I think the other thing that's missing here is that I don't think there's a bigger epidemic in the sports world than poor coaching education. I think it's the
Big
biggest.
on it. Oh my God.
Yeah, I think it's the biggest ubiquitous problem throughout the world. Regardless
Coach
of
education in terms of
in terms of everything, but I'm talking
okay.
specifically about well, two
Emotional
things.
regulation.
Well, I think that the biggest problem is there's not enough coaches that really understand developmental psychology and understand what is a reasonable expectation within normal limits for athletes at different ages. And that's not because you're a dummy. It's because you just don't know. Most coaches coach the way they were coached. And I think the best coaches are the ones that are constantly trying to become the best coach they can be, and they're getting educated. And so that's one thing. But the other thing for sure is emotion regulation. I don't remember ever talking to a coach that wasn't great at motivating athletes and amping them up. A handful of them know how to calm them down. That's the issue. That's the issue. And so that we're clear, when I'm talking about anger management, I'm not asking an athlete to do downward dog at the free throw line. This is not.
I'm pretty sure that would help some of them.
Well, at least their OnlyFans account would be appreciative of it, right? But the thing is that I think that we often simplify things or oversimplify things. These are not dichotomous. It's not anger, no anger. The metaphor that I talk about, and the reason why it's the subtitle of the book, Adjusting the Flame to Get What You Want and Need, is that I don't equate it to a switch. I equate it to a dial. I don't know if either of you are vegetarians, and anybody in the audience that are vegetarians might not appreciate this example, but it works for me. And I think it's got good applicability. There are a few things that make me happier than a good steak. And the key to a good steak, so long as it's medium or less, I prefer my rare. But the key to a good steak is high heat. And if you know how to control that heat, you can make beautiful music. But what happens if you can't adjust the flame? It's not a steak anymore. It becomes a piece of leather. Now it's a baseball glove, right? So the problem is not the heat itself. The problem is not the anger itself. It's being able to adjust the flame to the right amount for the task at hand. And so we want athletes to have a toolbox that is proficient enough that all you need to do is just tone it down a little bit. I don't want you to be calm. I want you to be aggressive. I just don't want you to be so hot that your mental skills have gone in the shitter. That's what I'm trying to avoid.
And to that end, right? Like it's like you said, it's not about like anger, no anger. Like when I work with my athletes, like one of my main focus is self-regulation and self-awareness, right? And recognizing in yourself, like, where is that line? Like, can I go right up to the edge and recognize in myself when I'm about to tip over and dial it back a half a notch so that I don't, right? And kind of like having that self-awareness, I think is like, that's, kind of to your point, Mitch, of like, at what point, where is the line for me as an athlete, which could be different for everybody, right? And how close can I get to it? And do I know when I'm there?
That's the holy grail, Leah. You just hit it on the head. If someone said to me, gun to my head, what's the most important anger management skill that you can have? The answer is early detection. Because it feels really good when you're angry. You're not going to stop it. It's like, there's a reason why bipolar disorder is so hard to treat. When people are manic, they're loving it. They're the last people to know that they're ruining their lives. And there's a real risk of that when you're angry as well. And so early detection has to be the most important skill. And so you start by teaching people the physiological reactions to anger so they could use that as a cue. And there's a lot of sports psychologists who try teaching it. There's only one problem. It's actually a useless set of skills because in competition, your sympathetic nervous system is going to spike. So if you're using that as your detector, it means you're always angry when you're playing. That didn't help. So in competition, what I teach the athletes I'm working with is um, you can't trust your physiology to tell you where you are emotionally. So pay attention to the change in your cognitive set. If I don't use those terms, pay attention to how your thinking changes. If you're more interested in executing your opponent than executing the next play, you have checked out. You are no longer in a position to help yourself or your team. They wrap their heads around that. And I also, by the way, think it's very important for coaches to develop emotionally intelligent teams. That if the three of us are on a team, sometimes you even have them sign a contract. We are in agreement that we want all three of us amped up, but not over the line. Sometimes you're the last person to know. Sometimes, and I'm going to get to triggers in a second, sometimes you feel that you were so personally slighted that someone came over, went over the line that now you're justified in your reaction. Well, you might be, but you're still going to be suspended and your team's still going to need you on the ice. So if I can provoke you, I can control you, right? So then on emotionally intelligent teams, not only do we tell people that we want them to have early detection, we also agree that if any of us detect any of us being too hot, so long as the sport rules allow for it, we're going to tap out, substitute out, cool down before we get back. So it's an expectation that we're going to play hot, but we're not playing white hot. If we're over the line, we all have a responsibility with the coach to identify it and remove the person so that they don't do damage to themselves or the team goals. But the other thing, because early detection is so important, is the appreciation of trigger recognition. There are direct triggers that everybody, universally, someone punches you in the nose, we understand you're going to want to go back at them. Someone says something about your mother, someone throws a racial epithet at, or whatever. There are certain things that everybody that witnesses would go, oh, fuck that. That was beyond the pale. I get it. Well, one of the things that we often say is it may not be your fault, but it's still your problem, meaning that you might be able to explain your behavior and people might agree with you, but it doesn't excuse it and it doesn't change the fact that you reacted, popped the guy in the face, now you're suspended and you can't help the team. But the more difficult is the indirect triggers, the things that have to do with your own personal insecurities. National championship game, there was a player on Miami after they lost, and apparently someone on Indiana made some comment about his father who had recently died. When everybody saw that athlete's reaction, they thought he was out of his mind. When later on it came out that his father recently passed away, and that other athlete said something inappropriate, all of a sudden they went, oh, right?
Yeah.
So I think that if we're going to talk about self-awareness, we also have to identify our indirect triggers and protect them. Keep them well hidden, keep them protected, learn to de-escalate early, because when those buttons get pushed, it's really, really, really hard. And the other thing is that I think that we would be remiss if we don't own the fact that psychological warfare exists in sport all the time. And once someone knows your buttons, they're going to continue to push it. So I couldn't agree with you more. Early detection is the most important thing. And the presumption that athletes have good self-awareness is just a presumption that's often wrong. We shouldn't leave that to chance.
It's interesting because the longer that I do this work, the more that I find I'm focusing on emotional identification and recognition, and learning how not even just to regulate emotions, but to just figure out what emotion you're feeling in the first place.
Well, you certainly can't manage it if you can't identify it, right?
So I'm here with Dr. Mitch Abrams and Leah Washington, and we're talking about anger, the emotion. We've been talking about aggression as a sort of behavioral response to that emotion of anger. And we've been talking just before the break there about the sort of first step in dealing with it and adjusting the flame, like Mitch talks about in his book, is recognition, self-awareness, recognizing triggers. And we've been talking about that in the context of sport and athletes, but that's kind of important for everybody, right? To be able to sort of recognize your own emotional triggers. And kind of notice that emotion of anger as it comes up. Like, what does it feel like? But in your book, Mitch, you also talk about some strategies for like dealing with that emotion once it has arrived. So you talk about things like visualization, journaling, so on and so forth. I just wonder if you could give us like a quick rundown of some of the things that you might do if you're working with an athlete or somebody else. Like, what do we do when we get angry?
So I think that you need to differentiate for them, as I said a little bit earlier, the in competition versus pre-competition work. Because in competition, it's going to be very difficult for you to utilize skills that you have not practiced ad nauseum, right? So,
Right.
and again, this is one of the places that sports psychologists know a lot of these tools, but not all of them. Deep diaphragmatic breathing, box breathing sometimes people use,
Mm-hmm.
progressive muscle relaxation, which I can't speak loudly enough. I can roll my shoulders right now and get my whole body to chill. But people don't realize that PMR takes a long time to really get good at it. It's not like, oh, 2 sessions and off you go. It's no,
Yeah.
you better be practicing it a couple of times a week and
So
increase your proficiency.
So PMR, just for those who don't know, is kind of the progressive muscular relaxation, learning how to differentiate between what tension feels like and what relaxation feels like. And the idea is that over like 6, 8, 10 weeks, you can start to train that relaxation response so you can do it quickly, right?
Absolutely. And because the sympathetic nervous system reaction is all or none, if you can slow down your breathing or you could slow down your muscle tension, you'll also slow down your heart rate and sweating and all of the other things that go along with that. I think another thing that's worth mentioning is imagery and visualization. But where a lot of folks talk about imagery and visualization for either relaxation or for imagining and visualizing successful perfection, I think imagery and visualization is a perfect opportunity to practice anger management skills. So when I'm doing imagery and visualization with folks, yeah, I teach them beach scene usually because it's so powerful. I'll talk to them about imagining great things because if they can imagine it, they can do it. But then I'll start barbing them and throwing them curveballs and pissing them off so that A, they see how their things go left quickly, and B, they start to realize, oh, fuck that, I'm not letting you do that to me. And so just as I said earlier, that the goal is to be unprovocable. Um, I want people to be uh, like Teflon. They're hard and nothing sticks to them. It just
Mm.
rubs right off of them, and they can recognize the threat coming quickly. And that comes with reps. But there's so many skills. There's journaling. There's distraction. I mean, look, everyone talks about how horrible phones are. Now, I'm not talking about actually in competition, but there are times, both athletes and non-athletes, where you're just so pissed you can't think straight. Well, you want to know something? Set your timer, give yourself 5, maybe 10 minutes, and go watch some absolutely hilarious TikTok, Instagram videos of cats throwing wallets into into the trash can or dogs sounding like they're talking. Because the truth is that where that can be seductive to waste your day, it's also very powerful to distract yourself so long as you give yourself a timeline to do it. Exercise is so powerful for de-escalation. However, I think that where people get it wrong is if you're going to use exercise as a de-escalation technique, you're not allowed to use striking exercises.
Okay.
You don't go hit the heavy bag. You don't take an MMA class when you're pissed. Because what happens is you're going to feel better afterwards. And then you're not going to have the heavy bag, but you're going to
Mm.
have your boyfriend. And guess what's going to happen? The behavior that was reinforced is what you're going to go to. So exercise is great, but not striking exercises when you're trying to de-escalate anger.
So this is really interesting because like Leah, my social media algorithm is just cooked, right? It's just wall to wall wellness bullshit. So one of the things that I see quite a lot of is these like men's wellness retreat type things where, and it is usually men. They kind of go on these retreats and they eat loads of barbecue food and they like
Learn how
lift
to drink
weights,
water like a man.
learn how to drink
Get
water
out
like
of
a
your
man, all that
car.
sort of stuff. And
Man.
like
That would mean no
but
straws, right?
right. But a
Straws
lot
are
of it,
pussies.
a lot of it is like ostensibly, like it's supposedly teaching these guys how to manage emotions, and what it's really doing is that, you know, they're screaming at rocks, or they're, you know, standing under a waterfall and shouting at the water or whatever, right? And or hitting stuff. So it's really interesting that you just said that about exercise, and kind of not using that kind of like striking type exercise, or that sort of like emotional outburst type stuff. And I kind of wonder what your take on that sort of thing is,
I
based on
think
kind of what you just said.
I think people are addicted to feeling better. It's like people try to get so precious with, people use drugs because they're self-medicating some unconscious mental illness. No, people use drugs because they work. That you feel better. People like to feel better. I don't have a
Mm.
problem with that. Let's just call it as it is. And when you cathartic, when you let out pent up energy, it feels better. And so I don't blame anyone for wanting to feel better, but we have to think about the unintended consequences. I talk
Yeah.
about in my book. I don't know if it's happened across the pond, but a big business that's been coming up is rage rooms. More,
Yeah.
yeah, it's bullshit. I mean, first off, destruction of property is the easiest way to get arrested quickly, right? And on top of everything else, after you're done in the rage room, you're more likely to break more shit. So if you had to pay for the rage room, you're also going to be paying for whatever legal fees you have and whatever you have to do to replace the items you
Yeah.
broke. So, I mean, I think that there's a whole discussion that can be had about masculinity and anger and violence. And interestingly enough, I think that the old um, bifurcation that men externalize and women internalize has become much more blurred and differentiated. And I think sports provided a lot of that, because sports provide an opportunity for women to emote just like men. Um, and I'm increasingly of the belief that it's not physiological, it's sociological, of how men and women act with regards to anger. But I think that those folks like that you're talking about with those retreats, it's just another money grab without any results. And if there was something to say, hey, listen, let's as a bunch of men get together and talk about how we fucked up our lives and how we try to prevent that from happening again. That could be useful. Let's talk about how anger has been motivating for us. And so we don't want to get rid of anger, but we need to stop jumping over the line. We need to learn skills that work. And, as is the case, all it takes is a website and a PayPal account, and anybody can be out there talking like they're experts. And so I'm concerned about those types of things. I don't know that they're necessarily well intended. Sometimes they may be. But if they're well intended, then they should also be well informed. And if that's the case, we should bring people in that understand something about anger management and not, shout out the rain or at a rock or waterfall. Um, you know, there's more
But I think
mature
I
ways
think
to
it's
do it.
interesting though. Like there is, while I agree, I think that there is a little bit of more of a blurring of the line. I think there is very much uh, a gendered component to it of like who's allowed to be angry,
Yeah,
and
yeah, but it's not testosterone based. I think
right.
that that's a lot of people would try to say that that's the case, and I think that's an oversimplification. Um, it's
No, I
not.
mean, I think people are socialized like that. A lot of women, at least Western women, are socialized to de-escalate, when their boyfriend gets upset or,
Yep.
whatever. And, we even look at in sports when a woman gets, you know, violent in a game, or when a coach is screaming at refs. I see this in a lot in like women's basketball, like women's basketball coaches. When we talk about them, screaming at referees or screaming at their, it's like pearl clutching and grass, and it's like, okay, but like this isn't different from like anybody else that we talk about in like revered tones.
Yes. I mean, look, first off, it is multiply determined. I'm not saying that hormones play no part in it. I'm not saying social construct have no part in it. It is multiply determined. I'm just saying it can't be pasteurized down to a specific thing. One
Oh,
of the
totally.
things, I'm sorry.
I said, yeah, totally. It's like when
Yeah,
you think of like that biopsychosocial, right? It's like the biology of the hormones, the psychology of the person, the
Yep.
socialization, right? It's all of it.
Well, and also the responsiveness that people have to the behavior. So there's, I
Right.
think, greater tolerance for men acting like fools than women. It's
100%.
interesting. I was talking to someone about this the other day. I remember I was at a Division II uh, uh, conference, and I had the opportunity. I was talking to a bunch of female college athletes, and I was just trying to pick their brains about what their experience of male versus female coaches. And this was all female athletes. And I thought they were gonna be like, "Thank God the women understand us," and they were like, almost like, I'm guesstimating the number, easily 80, if not 90% were like, "Women coaches suck." And I was like, I was like, "Where did that come from?" And what they said when they said it, I was like, "Oh, that makes sense." One was, the issue was that they had expectancy effects. They thought that the female coaches would be more sensitive to females' experience, but it wasn't the case at all, including um, female hormone issues, relationship issues, the differentiation. Like what they said was a lot of coaches, when they become coaches, forget they were athletes and no longer were sensitive to what a female athlete said. But the other thing that they said, which again, I rolled my eyes going, yeah, that makes sense, is that female coaches, because it's such a competitive environment, they feel like they have to act like male coaches in order to compete.
It's
And
very
I'm like, well,
performative.
yeah, so well, women acting like men is not an upgrade, right? Not necessarily. And so, yeah, so you have all of these issues of expectations. I mean, I remember when first Venus and then Serena hit the scene, and I mean, you want to talk about these women were machines. They were like I mean, you talk. I don't remember there ever being any other athlete in any sport, male or female, that immediately looked so much more physically dominant than everybody else they were playing against. And immediately, what I mean, racism aside, not saying it doesn't matter, but the first thing that started happening was they play like men,
Mm.
and that was not a compliment, right? And so I think it's more complicated for women because there's mixed messages in general. One of the things that we know in the mental health world as a whole, women tend to be bigger consumers of mental health services. And I think it's because women are socialized to have more social intelligence. So they tend to have more self-awareness, they tend to be more relationship driven, and they tend to be more willing to talk about their problems. So there's greater optimism for female athletes and coaches when they realize I'm not acting the way I want than male athletes and coaches. But it certainly doesn't have to be that way. And I think going back to the issue of problems with masculinity, a lot of it boils down to low self-esteem and just nobody is telling boys, look, you don't know what the fuck you're doing, and that's perfectly fine. It's completely normal. None of us knew what we were doing when we were that age. We give you permission to not know. And then what
Mm.
boys will tend to do is they'll puff out their chest, either being hypersexual or hyperviolent, as a way to demonstrate their efficacy. Instead of having good pro-social male models, it could be female models as well, but male models that say, "Hey, man, you're doing it wrong. I don't have a problem with you getting angry. I don't have a problem with you not knowing, but we're going to carry ourselves with a certain amount of class and expectation, and you're better than this." And we don't have enough of that. We don't have enough good male pro-social models helping young men become better at managing their anger. It's we just ignore them until they do something stupid, and then it's character assassination. I don't
Mm.
make any bones about the fact that there were many times in my life that I easily could have been on the other side of the bars,
Mm.
and we forget that. We get a little elitist, which is
Just
stupid.
to just to kind of like pick up on that point a little bit, because I kind of hear this argument all the time that there are no, sort of male role models, and I kind of want to challenge you on that a little bit. And like, is it that there aren't male role models, or is it that we as a society don't promote or celebrate the people that actually are good role models?
Both. I think
Both.
it's both. I don't think it's no. I just think there's not enough.
Okay.
I mean, look, I don't know enough about cultures outside of the United States. I'm admittedly ignorant.
Mm.
But inside the United States, there are too many fatherless homes. and too many women for that matter, that do an amazing job. I mean, if you follow the rubric, then how do you have so many successful kids coming from single family homes? Well,
Mm.
because sometimes women are doing really amazing jobs. Sometimes you have a greater extended family. I remember Nancy Boyd Franklin talked about in Black Families in Therapy, she talked about the value and the importance of not just the extended family, but also the church family. So a lot of things fill in and fill in the blank. And by the way, I will also say, just as you were talking about, we don't talk about the good things as much as we talk about the bad things. We were talking about some bad coaches. Nobody talks about how many coaches saved these kids' lives. I think
Mm.
there's a lot of coaches that wind up becoming the de facto pro-social male role model. And that's not to say all coaches are great, but the
Yeah.
majority are, and we don't talk about that enough. So I if I said it in a way that was too broad stroking, I retract that. I didn't mean that. It's not no. It's just not enough. There's not enough pro-social male role models, and we don't do enough attaboys for the ones that are doing it the right way. I think we could do a lot more of it because, I mean, God knows, I know coaches that changed people's lives, and of
Yeah,
course,
absolutely. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, then we'll see the Jerry Sandusky's, and we'll see this person who threw a basketball at their players or this, and that's good theater. But the majority of coaches are volunteering their time or being paid a pittance. God knows. Is there any other job that you're more vulnerable to your success based off of other people's actions? I mean, if parenting is ultimately thankless because you first off you don't get paid until you 20 years from now and you see if you did a good enough job and you still didn't get paid enough. Coaches, their whole career is based off of what other people do.
Yeah.
And yet there are people that keep coming to the table, male and female. And there's not enough talk about the amazing coaches that are out there that move the needle. But if we see a deficit, it means there's always room for more.
So this is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Leah Washington and Dr. Mitch Abrams, and we've had like a really, really interesting conversation about anger and about recognition of our own emotions and some of the strategies that we can use to think about recognizing our anger and other emotions, and then kind of working with it to get what we want, right? Because it's not necessarily a bad thing. Sort of see these things as sort of negative emotions, but actually there's a lot of facilitative nature to a lot of these things. If you have enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to give us a follow. We are on Instagram at 80% Mental, and we're not on Twitter anymore. I deleted all the Twitter accounts because fuck Elon Musk. But you can follow us on Instagram, or you can get in touch at 80percentmental.com. So like and subscribe and all that good social media stuff. Mitch, couple of final questions for you just to kind of finish up what we're talking about today. There's a lot to be angry about at the moment. There's a lot to be angry about. God knows. What can we do with that anger? What can we do to I don't know, manage it, harness it? What can we do? What should we do?
Well, I think you have to think about it both on the micro and the macro level, right? The micro level is the things that we already discussed with early detection, learning skills to de-escalate. When I say, by the way, skills, it also includes problem solving. I mean, the earliest theories about anger and violence is the frustration aggression hypothesis, right? You're more likely to become aggressive if you become frustrated, which is defined by someone interfering with your goals. Sports, holy shit, you have people on the other side of the pitch that their whole existence is to interfere with your goals. And sometimes those spouses that are supposed to be so helpful, they interfere with your goals. Sometimes the dean of the school, right? People frustrate us all the time. We have to learn how to be more effective at problem solving. And when we get too angry, it interferes with that. But the other thing that we should consider that leads into the macro of it is the prediction of consequences. What is it that we're trying to achieve? And how do we go about it? Like, if I hit a cop, what's going to happen to me? If I'm lucky, I'll just get arrested. Chances are I'm going to have some bumps and bruises along the way, right? Are we comfortable with that's a fair prediction? Okay.
I would say so, yeah.
Okay. The truth is there's
what happens if I hit a cop?
Same thing times 10.
Right.
I mean, that's an even longer conversation that we could talk about.
We'll save that one for another time.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that there's a lot that we can predict and steer around issues or manage it better. One of the places that it comes up in sports a lot is when people get pissed at refs for bad calls. Has anybody ever argued a bad call away? No. Usually they wind up with a red card or a tech on top of everything else, right? You want to keep talking? I'll tee you up. Have a nice day. But if you handle it the right way, you might get a makeup call, right? Hey, man, it's okay. I get it. I don't get it right all the time. You missed that one. Right?
I was great at that.
I'm sure I can see.
I was brilliant at that.
And we can predict that. And I think that how that expands to the macro is we have to determine what really fucking matters to us and what doesn't. You know, I don't know how. I've been saying this a lot lately. My daughter, who's 17 years old, who sometimes she's 27 and sometimes she's 7. But one of the things that she's really, really good at is letting things roll off her back. Like she does not have the capacity for grudges. God knows my wife does. And I don't have that skill. So I said to her once, I said, you didn't get it from really me or mommy. So how did you develop that? And she said, I don't know. I got shit to do. Which was, code for I'm not going to let whatever's going on interfere with my ability to get where I want to go. I think that we don't often consider where we want to go. In prison, we often talk about the fact that prisons are like aircraft carriers. If you're trying to change a culture, you can't change it on a dime. If you turn it too quick, it tips. So you have to navigate to where you want to go. And I think that that's true in life as well. I think we often sweat the small stuff too much. It's not the big ticket items that really get us to our core. And one of the reasons for that is that we're bombarded with irritants regularly. And it's not until we get to that explosion threshold and we have a real big blow up. And that explosion threshold usually happens it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, and it's a tiny straw, right?
Mm-hmm.
You wake up, your alarm didn't go off, you're starting off annoyed. If you're smart, you de-escalate, get back down the baseline. But we're not smart. And we go about our day, and then next thing you know, we spill coffee on ourselves. And then my wife tells me about a meeting that I was supposed to know that I forgot. And then it's up here. We get cut off. There's all kinds of things. And then it's something fairly benign, and we blow up. And ultimately, when we're talking about this reactive aggression prevention, we're preventing that explosion. Because once someone explodes, you only have 3 options. Medication, a lot of it. Physical restraint, a lot of it. We're letting it run its course and hoping the person doesn't ruin their lives in the process. So everything is about preventing getting to that explosion threshold. And very often, I'm sure, Leah and Pete, you've had these experiences where when you do blow up, people look at you like, really? That's what you blew up about? That's pretty kind of...
Yeah.
Right? So I think that we have to have an honest conversation with ourselves about what are the things that really matter the most, the non-negotiables. Where am I trying to go in life, and what do I want to sweat versus what I'm going to let roll off my back? And that might be a dynamic process. It may change. I think it's also important to study what we react to. I remember when I was in graduate school, I had a colleague who was an Orthodox Jewish girl who I absolutely hated. I couldn't figure out why. I hated her. And I remember thinking to myself, hey, this is part of my gang. I'm supposed to like her, right? And it took like 4 years later, I'm sitting in a professional development seminar, and all of a sudden I just blurt out, I understand why I hate you now. And everyone's looking at me like I'm crazy. And what I realized was that she was adept at playing the victim and getting people to help her. And she was very effective. And I was stupid and macho, and I could fucking do it myself. So guess what? I made everything 3 or 4 times harder for myself, while she figured out how to be more effective. And when I realized why I hated her, what I realized was I was actually jealous. I was impressed that she had a skill set that I either didn't have, couldn't have, or refused to embrace. And so we have to think about what are the things that piss us off and why. And the more we're better able to do that, the less likely we are to keep falling into the same holes, off the same cliffs over and over
Mm.
again. And this doesn't even consider the far extremes of behavior that sometimes people engage with. Like someone is involved in domestic violence or sexual assault, and you'll hear people try to just explain it away like, oh, it was just an accident. It wasn't an accident. You didn't trip and your penis fell into her. It wasn't an accident. It was an episode of bad judgment, really bad decision making. Your emotions got the best of you. Or they'll say, oh, it was just an emotional moment. We can assess people's ability to do this and develop ways for them to prevent themselves from doing this in the future. And that's, to me, the sweet spot that we don't talk about enough. If you have an athlete that engages in stupid behavior, either we discard them so that we disassociate them with, we disassociate ourselves with them, or we just brush it under the rug like it didn't happen. If you do not help people that have these problems, the problems will continue and there will be more victims elsewhere. So if you care about people in general, including the perpetrator of that act, then we have to assess it and give them treatment for it.
It's really interesting, that you bring that up, because I was thinking very clearly about an athlete that I worked with a number of years ago as a wrestler who would get into a lot of fights, and he was immediately written off as a fuck up, right?
Yep.
And until he and I had a conversation about what does fighting do for you? Because you wouldn't do it if it didn't meet some end, right? It didn't meet some need, right? But of course, all of his life, he'd been told, stop doing this. You're ruining your life. You're going to get kicked off the team, and fighting is bad, and fighting is bad, and fighting is bad. And I was like, well, yeah, but you're still doing it.
Right.
So it serves a purpose, right? And so it kind of goes until we kind of talked about oh, this is about power and control. Great. How else can we find power and control that maybe isn't violent?
Or reframe it. Reframe
Right.
it. I mean, the toughest guy in prison doesn't fight. He doesn't have to.
You don't have to.
Right? And so it links into masculinity a little bit, that we think that the ability to fight is about respect and power. But yeah, I think you're right on the money. There's this issue of what's the functionality of it. And I would even go a step further to say, all right, you get into fights and you probably win a lot of them. You're a wrestler. God knows wrestlers are hard to deal with. But I would argue, Bobby Knight included, people that can't control their anger, even if they're successful, could have been even more successful. So yes, maybe this serves a purpose for you, but are you going to be satisfied knowing that you're closing the door on opportunities when you could do shit that most people in your position would never get to?
And it's to your point of is this anger useful in this moment? Is this anger helpful in this moment? And it probably served some very valuable purpose at some point. But right now, it's actually working against you.
It might be the only time that he's ever had that conversation. And that's why it's confusing, right? Because God knows when you're training and you're dropping weight, you have to get motivated. I'm sure his anger was part of that dance. And when he's on the mat, I'm sure the anger helped him. But there are times it's too much. So don't get rid of it.
Right.
Recognize where and how much you want.
Final question for you, Mitch. Lots of information in the book. We'll put a link to the book in the episode description.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you a second to plug the book as well in a moment, so get yourself ready.
Okay.
But final question: if you could boil kind of everything that we've talked about today into one tip, your number one tip for maybe coaches, maybe parents who are dealing with athletes or kids or anyone really, what would your number one tip be for managing this emotion called anger?
It all starts in normalization and validation. Anger will be there for all of us. It's not up for debate. You either learn to manage it or it will manage you. It's really that simple. It could be used to do great things. It could also be very destructive. The idea that you can deny it away is just bullshit. Most people are hypocrites. They have one finger pointing out that way and three fingers pointing back at themselves. I'm an anger management expert. You'd follow me around. You'd go, really, Mitch? You're good at this? Well, I'm a lot better than I used to be. I'm continuing to improve. I think that if there's one message, it's going to be there anyway, and it can be destructive, or you can harness it and learn how to do great things with it. Do that.
That's fantastic advice. And if you want to do that, the best place to start is with Mitch's book. Mitch, tell us about your book, I'm Not Fucking Angry.
Okay, so the reason why it's called I'm Not Fucking Angry is because when people get sent to my office for anger management, and I ask them, hey, what's going on? What brought you here? They're, my wife or the judge or the coach said I have a problem with anger. I go, all right, well, what do you think? I'm not fucking angry, right? They yell it at me with bulging veins and all the rest of that stuff. And I'm like, oh clearly you're not. And so when I first started writing the book, I thought it was going to be mostly about athletes and mostly about young men. And the more I wrote it, the more I was thinking about a certain female CEO I work with that's got a big issue with anger. I was thinking about moms dealing with toddlers that are developmentally normal and how frustrating parenting is. And I started to realize this is not a book just about sports, and it's not just a book about masculinity. I do talk about those issues, but it's about, and I also talk a lot in the book of how I got here, because I certainly have had a checkered past with it. And so the thesis is everything that we discussed today. It's going to be there. Learn to adjust the flame. Enjoy a good steak every now and then. But do the best you can to use your emotions. I think there are entirely too many people that deny how they feel. And because of that, they don't use it. So this book is, it's available all major outlets, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's an audio book that's out there. I was going to actually ask that they develop a Brooklyn version. So that I was talking to, I was like, so when I do this, and because I insisted on narrating it myself, I said, can I do a Brooklyn cut with more curses? And they said, well, we know that you're going to curse anyway, and it's got to be 90% the same as the book. So the audiobook's out there. I think it's an easy listen, an easy read. I think a lot of people will find it very practical. There'll probably be some chuckles in there. But I'm also real interested in people's opinions about it. And that's why, for you, Pete, Leah, and the audience, I'm not hard to find. I have a lot of opinions about this, but I also really love talking about it. And I don't believe that I have every nook and cranny covered, but I think that this is something that is endemic to the human condition, is not talked about enough. I'm a lifelong learner. I want to continue to hear people's opinions. Some I agree, some I don't. There's certainly nuances that I don't always appreciate because it's not my scope. But I hope that this is the beginning of many conversations. And I'd be remiss to not appreciate the fact that sport is one of those crazy places that anger and aggression is encouraged. So there's also this issue of stimulus differentiation. How are so many athletes really good at doing this in their sport, but not so much outside of sport, even if it's too often if there was one incident. So I hope that this book and this podcast create an opportunity for more discussion, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity to do so.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We did it eventually. It wasn't in Montreal in a bar, but we got there. Next time.
Well, maybe just as we were looking to do a Brooklyn narration, maybe we should do a bar version sometime in the future with us being a little bit more disinhibited.
Sold, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Mitch. Really appreciate you coming on. And thank you guys out there in listener land for listening. I'm assuming you've got this far. Don't forget to subscribe at 80percentmental.com. You can check out all of our other episodes, including the episode way back in season 2 with Mitch, where we talked about bad behavior in sports. Some really fascinating insights in that episode too. Leah, thank you so much.
Of course, bestie. My pleasure.
Good to catch up and do some podcasting again. And yeah, I've totally forgotten what we do at the end. What do we do at the end of podcasts?
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, I'm sure there's other bits. I'm sure
do you have a tickler for the next one you're doing?
I don't really know what the next one we're doing is. Oh, we're doing an Olympic special, but we're recording them out of sequence, so that might not necessarily work. But yeah,
Well, I'm
subscribe.
honored to break the ice with you guys again, and get the following an
He's
Olympic
back in
motorfall,
gear.
getting the snowball off the edge of the mountain again.
Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed what you've heard today, and make sure that you tune in next time, whatever the next episode is going to be, and we will see you there. Well, we won't see you though, will we? Because it's a podcast.